Something massive just happened deep inside Russia, and something inside Uri, and most people in this country have no idea what it actually means. We're not talking about a skirmish on some front line you've seen on a map. We're talking about Ukrainian drones flying over 900 miles into Russian territory and hitting one of the crown jewels of Russia's entire war economy. The Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat complex in Bashkortostan, Warshur and Ainei Da, Russia's 10th largest refinery with an annual capacity of 10 million metric tons, producing more than 150 petroleum and chemical products, got hit. And then it got hit again, 2 times in less than a week, with 2 industry sources confirming that the CDU-6 crude distillation unit caught fire. A unit that normally processes around 6 million tons of oil and gas condensate per year, accounting for roughly 60% of the plant's total production capacity. Let that sink in for a moment. 60% of one of Russia's most strategically vital industrial complexes. Gone, not in a Hollywood explosion, not in a dramatic battlefield moment, but quietly, surgically, by drones that flew more than 1,000 kilometers to find their target. So in our do it and these I say, and this isn't an isolated incident. This is part of something much, much larger. A shift in how this war is being fought, who holds the real leverage, and what it means for the global order that every single one of us in America lives inside of. So stay with me here, because what I'm going to walk you through in the next few minutes is not what you're hearing on the evening news. This goes deeper than that. Let's start by understanding what we're actually looking at when we talk about Russia's petrochemical infrastructure, because without that foundation, none of the rest of this makes any sense. Russia's entire ability to wage war rests on a relatively simple but extraordinarily powerful economic engine. So, Sildi and oil and gas. That's it. That's the whole story at its core. Oil money represented 50% of Russia's budget revenues between 2011 and 2014, around 40% in 2019, 30% in 2023 and 2024, and an estimated 23% in 2025. Now, you might look at that declining percentage and think, so well, Russia's getting less dependent on oil. And that would be the wrong conclusion entirely. What it actually reflects is that the war itself has become so expensive, so consuming, that even with massive oil revenues, the proportion to the total budget has shifted. The revenues themselves remain enormous, and they remain the lifeblood of the Kremlin's ability to keep funding its military machine month after month, year after year. So when Ukraine starts systematically burning down Russia's refinery capacity, it's not just an energy story, it's a war funding story. It's a geopolitical story, and it's a story about what happens when a smaller nation figures out a way to punch directly at the engine room of a nuclear superpower without without triggering World War III. Now let's talk about the scale of what Ukraine has actually accomplished here, because the mainstream coverage tends to treat each individual drone strike as a one-off event, a news blip, when in reality what's happened over the course of 2025 is nothing short of extraordinary. As of early October 2025, 21 of Russia's 38 large refineries had been hit since January, with successful attacks increasing by 48% compared to the whole of 2024, ultimately resulting in around 20% of Russia's refining capacity being at least temporarily dismantled. 20%. Think about what that means for a country that is simultaneously trying to run a massive ground war, keep its domestic population supplied with fuel, and maintain export revenues to keep the whole financial machinery from collapsing. Ukraine forced Russia to reduce oil processing from 5.4 million barrels per day in July to just 5 million 2 months later. And then the strikes kept coming. By November, Ukraine had executed more than 160 successful strikes on Russian oil facilities, with daily refinery capacity falling to roughly 5 million barrels and expected to drop further. This is not a campaign of random destruction. This is a deliberate, structured, economically targeted strategy, and it's working. And here's the thing that I want you to really sit with for a moment. This strategy, hitting Russia's economic infrastructure rather than just its military hardware, is arguably the most rational and effective approach Ukraine could have taken. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself said that hits on Russia's refineries are the most effective sanctions, the ones that work the fastest. So, Kanzi once in deal, and when you look at the numbers, it's hard to argue with him. Because Western sanctions, for all the political energy that went into designing and implementing them, have faced constant evasion. Russia built a so-called shadow fleet of tankers. It rerouted oil to China and India. It found workarounds. but you cannot sanction a drone strike out of existence. You cannot reroute a fire at your CDU-6 crude distillation unit. When the physical infrastructure burns, it burns. And repairs take time, money, and specialized equipment that Russia is increasingly cut off from due to those very same sanctions. It's a compounding trap, and Russia is caught in it. Let's zoom in on the specific facility that's become almost a symbol of this entire campaign, the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat complex. The Salavat Petrochemical complex produces gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and other petroleum products, as well as liquefied gases, butyl alcohols, polyethylene, polystyrene, and ammonia. That list matters, because we're not just talking about fuel here. We're talking about the chemical building blocks that feed into Russia's broader industrial and military economy. Ammonia, for instance, is a precursor to explosives and fertilizers. Polyethylene feeds into packaging, construction, and manufacturing. When you knock out a facility like this, not once, but twice in less than a week, you're not just cutting fuel supply. You're disrupting a whole downstream chain of production that eventually touches military logistics, civilian stability, and the Russian government's political legitimacy at home. The Russian people, after all, have to live inside this economy. They fill up their cars, they buy goods in stores, they feel the price hikes, and they notice when the pumps start running dry, because that's exactly what started happening. In September 2025, Reuters reported that Russia was seeing fuel grade shortages, with the reduced refinery runs caused by drone attacks and high borrowing costs leading to private filling stations being unable to stockpile fuel. Problems from the shortages started to emerge in the Volga River region and in southern and central Russia, with rising prices, rationing, long queues, and pumps running dry in some cases. In Crimea, Russian occupation officials limited gasoline sales to 20 liters per customer and imposed price caps. Now, I want you to think about what that looks like from the perspective of an ordinary Russian citizen who has been told by state media that everything is fine, that the special military operation is going according to plan, and that Russia is winning. And then you drive to the gas station and there's a line around the block and there's a sign that says you can only buy 20 liters. That gap between the official narrative and lived reality is where political pressure builds. Slowly, but it builds. Now, let me address something that some analysts have pointed to as a reason not to get too excited about all of this. In November 2025, Reuters reported that Russia's oil processing had fallen only 3% during the year despite the attacks, as refineries averted a steep decline by using spare capacity to offset the damage. And that's true. Russia's refining system is the world's third largest. It has redundancy. It has excess capacity that it can activate. And so some people look at that 3% figure and say, see, the drone campaign isn't really working. But I think that's exactly the wrong way to read this, because the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace put it perhaps best of all when they compared Russia's refineries to a man being repeatedly punched. He will not die from one punch or even half a dozen punches, but it becomes harder and harder to recover after each subsequent blow. Although no single punch is fatal, he could end up being beaten to death. And crucially, the attacker has the advantage. It sprays it's far harder for Moscow to redeploy air defenses than it is for Kiev to simply redirect its strikes to poorly protected refineries. Every time Russia reinforces one facility, Ukraine just targets another. It's a classic asymmetric warfare dynamic, and Ukraine has figured out how to exploit it brilliantly. And now let's talk about the financial consequences, because this is where the story really starts to connect to the global economy that you and I live in. Rosneft bor Inoskastai and Mizdan size for SSA and Riskais, one of Russia's absolute flagship oil companies, Truto reported a 70% collapse in net income for the first 9 months of 2025, down to 3.57 billion US dollars. 70%. This is not a rounding error. This is a catastrophic deterioration in the financial health of the company that is supposed to be one of the pillars of Russian state power. The International Energy Agency said that Russia's oil revenue declined to one of the lowest levels seen since the start of the war in 2022. And remember what we established earlier, or in Kiskanti, in oil revenue is not just an economic metric for Russia, it is the fuel for the war itself. Every ruble that doesn't flow into the Kremlin's coffers is a ruble that isn't paying for missiles, drones, artillery shells, and soldier salaries. The drone strikes on these petrochemical facilities are, in the most direct possible sense, strikes against Russia's ability to keep fighting. And the drone technology Ukraine is using to pull this off deserves a moment of real appreciation, because this is genuinely remarkable engineering under conditions of existential pressure. Ukraine has invested heavily in new long-distance drone technology, putting out weapons such as the Lyuty drone, which is capable of delivering explosives up to 2,000 kilometers from its secret launch site. 2,000 kilometers. The Strelidomet complex that was hit in November roughly 1,500 kilometers or 932 miles inside Russian territory was reachable because Ukraine built the capability to reach it. This is a nation that is being outgunned in terms of conventional military hardware, that has been waiting for Western weapons deliveries that are often delayed or restricted, and yet it found a way to develop indigenous long-range strike capability that can reach deeper into Russia than almost anyone thought possible just 2 years ago. There is a lesson here about innovation under pressure that goes well beyond this particular conflict. Now, I want to bring this back home because you're in the United States and you might be asking yourself, okay, this is fascinating, but what does it actually have to do with me? And the answer is everything. Everything about the global power structure that shapes your daily life runs through energy. The price of gasoline at your pump, the cost of goods in stores, the behavior of global markets, the leverage that various nations have over each other. All of it is intertwined with who produces energy, who refines it, and who can reliably deliver it to the world. Russia is one of the world's largest energy producers. Russia produces roughly 10 million barrels per day of oil, representing 11% of global supply in 2024. When that capacity is disrupted, when when refinery after refinery takes damage, when fuel shortages ripple across Russian regions, when export volumes drop, that doesn't stay contained inside Russia's borders. It sends signals through global commodity markets. It changes the calculations of OPEC members. It affects the countries that depend on Russian energy exports. Turkey saw a massive 27% month-on-month reduction in imports of Russian oil products in September, the lowest levels since November 2022. That's Turkey, a NATO member, scrambling to find alternative supplies. These ripple effects are real and they're spreading. And there's another dimension to this that rarely gets enough attention in American media coverage, and it's the question of what this conflict is revealing about the changing nature of military power itself. For decades, the conventional wisdom was that raw military strength, tank divisions, missile arsenals, nuclear stockpiles, Tasis was the ultimate guarantor of a great power's security and influence. Russia had all of that. Russia was supposed to be untouchable deep inside its own territory, and then a nation with a fraction of Russia's military budget started flying relatively cheap drones over 1,000 miles into Russian airspace and setting billion-dollar industrial facilities on fire. An independent oil and gas analyst, Boris Ehrenstein, said the Ukrainian drone strikes had caused the most severe crisis in recent years, adding that the size, coordination, and repeated waves of the drones make Russia unable to repair the refineries before the next attack occurs. The size, the coordination, the relentlessness of it. Ukraine didn't just build a weapon, it built a doctrine. And that doctrine is rewriting the rules of what warfare looks like in the 21st century in ways that every major power on Earth, including the United States, is watching and studying very carefully right now. There's also a moral dimension to this story that I think deserves to be spoken out loud, because there's been a debate in certain circles about whether targeting civilian infrastructure refineries, petrochemical facilities, energy plants crosses some kind of ethical line. And it's a legitimate question worth engaging with seriously, but here's the context that often gets left out of that debate. Russia has been systematically targeting Ukraine's power grid, its heating infrastructure, its hospitals, its water systems throughout this entire war. Ukrainian civilians have spent winters in the dark and the cold, specifically because Russian missiles and drones have been aimed at the infrastructure that keeps civilian life going. Ukraine's strikes on Russian petrochemical facilities are aimed at the economic and industrial backbone that funds and supplies the Russian military. The targeting logic is fundamentally different, and it is producing results that are measurable, significant, and directly connected to Ukraine's ability to survive as a sovereign nation. And let's be honest about what sovereignty means in this context, because this conflict is not, at its deepest level, just about Ukraine and Russia. It is about whether the principle that borders cannot be changed by force, the foundational norm of the post-World War II international order, still holds. If Russia succeeds, if it absorbs Ukrainian territory through military conquest, the precedent that sets for every other revisionist power on the planet is catastrophic. China watches, North Korea watches, Iran watches. Every nation that has territorial ambitions watches what happens when a large power invades a smaller one and the world responds. Ukraine's ability to strike back, economically, industrially at the heart of Russia's war machine, is not just about Ukraine's survival. It is about whether deterrence still means anything in a world of rising revisionist powers. Around 30% of Russia's budget in 2024 was derived from oil and gas, meaning that anything that compromises the Russian oil industry in turn reduces Russia's capacity to make war. That connection between burning refineries in Bashkortostan and the Kremlin's ability to write checks for ammunition and soldier pay in Auri, in Kaunas Awari, and is direct, measurable, and consequential. And what Ukraine has done, with relatively modest resources compared to what Russia is fielding, is find the precise pressure point in that chain and hit it repeatedly with growing precision and growing range. Combined with new and tightening US sanctions, Russia's ability to finance the war is being crushed from two sides, internally by Ukrainian precision strikes destroying its ability to function, and externally by international sanctions cutting off its remaining global buyers. This is what a genuinely effective economic warfare strategy looks like when it's actually working. It is slow, it is cumulative, and it doesn't make for dramatic headlines every day. But over time, as a mirror and the compounding damage adds up to something that no amount of propaganda can paper over. The deeper geopolitical shift that all of this points to is one that I think will define the next decade of international relations. The era of the untouchable great power, protected by geography and nuclear deterrence, is being quietly revised by technology. Drone swarms, long-range precision strikes, the ability to reach industrial infrastructure that was previously assumed to be safe behind a nation's borders. These are changing the calculus of power. Russia's capacity to exert international influence, maintain its war effort, and rebuild for possible future ambitions all ultimately boils down to one critical metric: oil production. And that metric is under sustained, intelligent, technologically sophisticated assault in a way that no one would have predicted 3 years ago. What we are watching in real time is the unraveling of one model of great power security and the emergence of something new and as yet undefined. And that process, wherever it ultimately leads, is going to reshape the world that all of us live in for a very long time to come.